They first noticed the smell. It drifted in from the rough ground beyond the fields, carried on certain winds, sour, animal, unmistakably wrong. The kind of smell that lingered in the back of the throat long after it was gone. A man, it was said, lived beyond the parish boundary, where the hedgerows thinned and the land gave way to rough ground and forest. No one remembered when he had arrived, only that he did not attend church, did not take part in harvest, and did not answer when called by name. At first, the villagers noticed only small things. Sheep found dead, but not eaten. Tracks in the frost that did not fully match any animal they knew. A man-shaped shadow seen near the tree line at dusk, standing still, watching. The man was seen rarely. When he was, he kept his distance. His clothes were worn thin. His hair grew long and matted. His eyes reflected light strangely when caught by lantern glow. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice was rough, as though unused. Livestock losses increased. More sheep were found dead but untouched, their bodies abandoned, as though whatever had killed them had lost interest midway through the act. Some said it was wolves, though wolves had been gone from the region for generations. Others said it was punishment, or illness, or sin. The villagers argued about what to do or who was to blame. Suspicion rose. The village was fearful. They went to seek guidance at church. The priest said nothing. Days went by with anxiety increasing. But then, a child went missing. A search party was sent out and found tracks by morning. The prints sank too deep for an animal, and where a heel should have been, there was only a smear, as though the foot had dragged itself forward rather than lifted. No one wanted to follow them. The villagers followed the tracks through the rough ground and into the forest. They led to a hollow where the earth dipped sharply, hidden by bracken and thorn. Inside they found bones, a shoe, a torn sleeve, human remnants placed carefully aside. Bones lay scattered, animals mostly. But some were unmistakably human. And there, crouching by the hollow, was what remained of a man. His spine curved forward, forcing him into a half-crouch. Hair covered his face and chest in clotted mats, and his mouth was stained dark. His eyes reflected the torchlight. He did not attack. He only watched them, head tilted, lips pulled back from broken teeth as his chest rose and fell in animal breaths. When one of the men spoke his name, the name he had once used, the creature shuddered. A sound escaped him. It might once have been a word. The priest stepped forward and began to pray. The creature screamed, not like an animal, like a man who remembered what he had lost. He fled on all fours, disappearing into the dark so quickly that none dared follow. The child was never found, and the man was not seen again. No one crossed the boundary stone again. The earliest mention of him appears not in a story, but in a margin. A note scratched beside a sermon copied by hand sometime in the late 12th century, warning the reader that some sins do not end in death, but in removal. Beneath it, in a different hand, a single word had been added later: wolf. In the modern imagination, the werewolf is loud. It howls. It tears. It transforms beneath a full moon in a spectacle of bone and blood. It is a monster revealed in motion, made frightening by violence and speed. But this is not how the old stories describe it. In British folklore, the wolfman does not announce himself. He does not change in front of witnesses. He does not rage through villages or hunt crowds beneath silver light. He withdraws. He is noticed slowly, through absence, through behavior, through the sense that someone has stepped too far from what they once were. The old accounts do not ask what happens when a man becomes a wolf. They ask something quieter and more unsettling. What happens when a man is no longer fully human and no longer fully welcome among his own kind? Wolfmen were not spoken of openly. They were recorded carefully, reluctantly, as if naming them too clearly might invite imitation. They appeared in chronicles, legal complaints, and church writings. Never as spectacle, never as monsters to be slain, but as examples of what became of those who crossed too far from God, from law, from the human order. They were men who had stepped outside the parish and found the parish did not follow. One such account comes from a village whose name no longer survives. Only its boundary stones remain, half sunk into the soil, their markings eroded by the rain. A man had taken communion. He had worked the fields. He had spoken the same prayers in the same rhythm as everyone else. But there were accusations, quiet ones at first, of violence, of blasphemy spoken aloud, of refusing confession. Some said he had struck a priest. Others said worse things, things that could not be proven without witnesses willing to speak. When famine came, suspicion followed. When livestock began to vanish, the suspicion hardened. The church record does not say he was condemned, only that he was removed from fellowship and instructed not to return until he had shown repentance. The implication was clear. He was not exiled by force. He was pushed outward by absence. He crossed the boundary stone at dusk and did not return. After that, the accounts change in tone. Sheep were found dead but not eaten, their throats torn, bodies left where they fell. Children were warned not to wander. Women reported being watched from the tree line. A figure was seen moving low through the brush at dawn, then standing upright once it reached cover. The sermons grew sharper. The priest spoke of divine punishment, of men who lived in sin so long that God allowed them to reflect their inner state outwardly. He warned that such men did not become beasts all at once. They wore away. In other regions, similar figures appear. In the north, men spoke of wild men living beyond settlements, neither fully mad nor fully animal, surviving on what they could take or be given. In Scotland, stories tell of cursed men who fled into forests after crimes they could not face, living as beasts until they forgot their names. And in Shetland, there is the Wulver. He is not violent. He does not hunt people. He is described as a wolf-headed man who lives alone near water, fishing quietly and leaving his catch for the poor. He does not enter homes. He does not speak. He is tolerated, not welcomed, but allowed to remain because he harms no one. The Wulver reflects an older understanding that wolfmen were not always monsters. They were boundary figures, living reminders of what happens when a person no longer belongs fully to either world, neither beast nor man, neither damned nor saved. In all these accounts, the fear is not transformation. It is exile, to live without witness, without law, without forgiveness. The wolf mattered in Britain because it once represented everything beyond protection: hunger, exposure, isolation, and moral collapse. To be driven into the wild was not symbolic. It was a sentence. Survival depended on shared labor, shared rules. To exist outside that structure was to exist on borrowed time. This is why early wolfmen accounts were framed as punishment rather than transformation. The message was clear: abandon moral law or be abandoned by society. The wolfman was not powerful. He was reduced. It was degradation, a stripping away of human structure until only instinct remained. These stories functioned as warnings about what happens when structure breaks down, within a person or within a community. Violence, unchecked desire, and exile were not separate dangers. They were linked. To lose one's place among others was to lose one's humanity. They warned that exile, unchecked sin, violence, or abandonment of communal life could strip a person of what made them human. Even regional variants that softened the image, such as the Wulver of Shetland, retain this tension. The Wulver is not violent. He leaves fish for the poor, yet he does not live among them. He exists apart, marked by difference. Compassion does not return him to the village. The boundary remains. This ambiguity is crucial. Wolf beings were not always evil, but they were always outside. They belonged to the margins, forests, moors, liminal ground between cultivated land and wilderness. In a world where survival depended on community, to live alone was already a form of death. These were not horror stories meant to frighten children. They were moral and social warnings, embedded in belief. They taught that humanity was not inherent. It was maintained. And once lost, it could not always be recovered. The Wolfman was simply its shape. The chronicles do not say these men were hunted down. They say they were avoided, left to erode, and perhaps that is why these stories persist, because they do not ask whether monsters exist. They ask how long a man can live outside society before he becomes something else entirely, something that no longer knows how to return. Some boundaries, once crossed, do not close behind you. They wait, and they remember. In the modern world, the wolf no longer waits at the forest edge, but the conditions that created the wolfman have not vanished. They have only changed shape. Isolation is no longer enforced by wilderness, but by absence. Absence of community, of witness, of shared ritual. People can live surrounded by others and still exist beyond the boundary, unseen, unheard, unaccounted for. Hunger is no longer only for food, but for connection. Exposure is no longer to weather, but to silence. And moral collapse no longer announces itself through visible exile. It happens quietly, behind closed doors, in spaces where no one is watching closely enough to intervene. In this context, the wolfman is no longer a creature of the woods. He is a figure at the edge of society, the forgotten, the displaced, the chronically unseen. The one who no longer speaks the shared language, who no longer moves in time with the rest. The old stories warned that when a person lives too long without structure, without accountability, without forgiveness, without belonging, something essential begins to erode. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, until what remains no longer recognizes itself. We no longer tell these stories as warnings. We call them myths. But the fear they expressed remains familiar. Not the fear of transformation, but the fear of vanishing, of becoming less than human through separation rather than magic. The wolfman has not gone away. He has simply learned how to blend in. There are older fears still, buried beneath names and stories, warnings shaped by hunger, silence, and distance from the fire. They were never meant to frighten, only to remind. The land remembers what we forget, and it continues to speak, even now. If you wish to hear what still lingers in the quiet places, subscribe to Whispered Folklore.